This is the face of Egyptian religion. So is this. And this. For thousands of years, great kings towered over the Egyptian landscape, eternally confident and serene. They were pillars of the cosmos, architects of an orderly universe. And to ordinary Egyptians, they were nothing less than living gods.
The Egyptians thought of the pharaoh as a human being. But this human being was unlike all others. The pharaoh could say, "Build me a temple over here," and a temple would be built. A peasant could say, "Build me a temple over here," and nothing would happen. The difference is that the pharaoh has a divine force of authority within him. The peasant doesn't.
At every temple, it was the pharaoh who symbolically acted as the link between humanity and the gods. Egypt's kings are shown on countless temple walls and columns, making offerings to various deities. In return, the gods were expected to bring about a world of harmony, a world in which the fertilizing Nile would rise, the sun would be reborn each dawn, and foreign armies would be kept far from Egypt. The largest temples were dedicated to deities of national stature, like Re, the sun god, Ptah, creator god of Memphis, and Amun, king of all the gods. The ongoing religious rituals of a temple, commonly known as the temple cult, were performed by an elite priesthood to benefit the entire nation. Most Egyptians did not take part in or even witness such rites. There were a few occasions when ordinary Egyptians might glimpse the god, or even ask for divine help in matters of personal concern. One of the most important of these events was the festival of the Opet at Karnak.
This is an annual festival, once a year, and it involved the god Amun of Karnak and his statue being placed in a shrine, and the shrine being placed on a ceremonial boat, which in turn was placed on the shoulders of priests. And these priests would leave the temple, and people could crowd around the god. We have many oracle texts. This is a time when people would come and actually consult the god and ask for advice from the god because it was easier to get to him because he was out of the temple.
Similar festivals took place at other temples. Although there were literally hundreds of gods, some experts believe that ancient Egyptian religion also included a form of monotheism, the belief in a single god. This concept can be traced to Egypt's best-known creation myth, in which 9 original gods fashioned the universe, including all the other deities. The first and most important of the 9 creator gods was Atum.
When people look at Egypt and think of all these different gods, in many ways it was all one god, all deriving from this original all god. And in fact, his name Atum does mean the all god.
As time passed, Atum became linked with another deity in the pantheon, a local god named Amun. Eventually, Amun emerged as Egypt's preeminent deity, the new all-god.
Amun is the single greatest force in the universe. The power of the sun in the sky can be understood as a manifestation of Amun's kingship. The power of writing, of intellectual creation, embodied in the gods Thoth and Ta, could be understood as manifestations of Amun's intellectual processes. You can explain the world to yourself by many different gods, many different forces and elements, but also one God, because all of these can be facets of a single God. You could say the Egyptians, for a great deal of their history, were monotheists, but they were also polytheists. One God was one explanation of how the universe worked, but not the only explanation.
The seemingly odd coexistence of monotheism and polytheism within pharaonic religion continued through most of ancient Egyptian history. There was, however, one exception: the epic religious revolution of the New Kingdom pharaoh Akhenaten, the so-called heretic king. Egypt is a life-size time capsule, a living memory of the pharaonic religion that thrived here for untold generations. Temple carvings show the secret rituals acted out within their walls for centuries. Inscriptions preserve the words of long-dead priests. Yet scattered fragments are all that remain from one of the most extraordinary chapters in the history of Egyptian religion. His given name was Amenhotep IV. He became pharaoh in 1353 BC, successor to one of Egypt's greatest kings, Amenhotep III. Soon after, he changed his name to Akhenaten, but this was just a hint of the storm he was about to unleash. In a series of sweeping moves, Akhenaten banned the worship of all traditional deities. He replaced them with what he claimed was the one true god, Aten, the disk of the sun. Some consider Akhenaten the creator of monotheism as we know it today, the precursor of Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. Others view Akhenaten's one god as a refinement of existing Egyptian belief.
Akhenaten grew up in a world where Amen, the idea of a single god, was one explanation of reality. So you can't really say that Akhenaten really created that. But what Akhenaten did create was the idea that there is only one valid explanation of reality. In a sense, Akhenaten is not the inventor of monotheism. Akhenaten is the inventor of univalent logic, the idea that only one explanation of reality can be true.
Akhenaten not only denounced the previously established gods, he closed their temples and dismissed their officials. In particular, he singled out the powerful priesthood of the great god Amun.
Akhenaten instituted a form of monotheism, but he also really persecuted the Amun cult above any other traditional cult in Egypt. I mean, much more than the cult of any other Egyptian deity. And people have seen that as an indirect reflection of the fact that the power of the priesthood of Amun had become large enough to disturb the pharaohs.
Surviving inscriptions indicate that Akhenaten instituted a kind of spiritual monopoly. Only the royal family, and most importantly, Akhenaten himself, could be intermediaries with Aten.
Particular political role that he had through his monotheistic suggestions was not lost upon the folks around, because just down the street were the priests of Amun, who had temples and wealth and clout in the government, and they were clearly being pushed aside by Pharaoh Akhenaten, who was saying, if you want to know where power resides, it resides with me.
However, Akhenaten's reign lasted less than 20 years, not long enough to wipe out the traditional belief in Amun, nor fully suppress his priesthood. The pharaohs who ruled after Akhenaten restored Amun and the ancient gods, while systematically dismantling Akhenaten's temples. The heretic king was nearly wiped from history. However, later pharaohs had learned a lesson about the power of the Amun priesthood.
The kings of the time made sure that the cult of Ptah at Memphis achieved equal importance and wealth, and the cult of the sun god Ra at Heliopolis did also. They certainly restored the Amun cult, but they kind of balanced its potential power by paying equal attention to the other two major temples of Egypt.
Egypt's ancient religion had survived its first great challenge. The traditional pantheon of gods would reign supreme for another 1,000 years before they were tested again. It was in 332 BC that Alexander the Great stormed into Egypt, extending his dominion from Macedonia to the land of the Pharaohs. But this young conqueror desired more than plunder. He envisioned the diverse people in his empire sharing language, commerce, and religion. This interconnected realm would eventually be recognized as the Greco-Roman world.
Alexander the Great was perhaps the first person that we know of that had this kind of vision of the world as being one, the world as being oikumene, the entire inhabited earth. And finally, those are the values that are picked up also by the Romans later on.
After Alexander's death, his top generals divided up the empire. Ptolemy I grabbed Egypt and ruled from the new capital of Alexandria. His dynasty, the Ptolemies, would last nearly 300 years until the Roman conquest of Egypt in 30 BC.
The Ptolemies continued many of the building programs. They emulated much of the art. They maintained the hieroglyphs. There was a real effort during that time into the Roman period to maintain the heritage of ancient Egypt.
The Greco-Roman conquerors also maintained Egypt's pantheon of ancient gods. This was shrewd politics. Preserving Egyptian traditions was a way of retaining control. A prime example of such continuity is this temple at Dendera. Though started by the Ptolemies and completed by the Roman emperors Tiberius, Domitian, and Trajan, it served as a cult center for Hathor, a purely Egyptian fertility goddess. Another example was the venerable Egyptian god Horus. The Ptolemies revered him as a cherubic agricultural fertility god, Harpocrates. During the Roman era, Horus was again the falcon-headed deity, but often he was shown wearing armor. In one depiction, Horus was presented as a Roman warrior, defeating chaos, in the form of a crocodile, by piercing it with a spear. But of all the Egyptian deities, Isis was the most revered by Greco-Roman rulers. They built several cult temples for the goddess, most notably at Philae in the south of Egypt. The Isis cult soon spread through the Mediterranean world. It even reached as far as modern-day England, Germany, and Russia, though Isis was depicted in Greco-Roman rather than Egyptian fashions. The Roman emperors eventually viewed this widespread acceptance as a threat to their own power, and they took steps to limit pharaonic religion. Official edicts placed all Egyptian temples under the control of a single Roman official.
They also made the temples completely dependent on the Roman Empire for sustenance, for their own funding. So that when, in the 3rd century, the Roman Empire itself began to suffer from economic catastrophe, the temples too went under.
Despite such adversity, Egypt's ancient beliefs persisted, and in some places thrived. However, their severest threat was already emerging, a new monotheistic faith that was taking root in the Greco-Roman world. But unlike the heresy of Akhenaten, this movement would spell ultimate doom for the gods and goddesses of the pharaohs.